They used to call her just a maid, not in anger, not even loudly, but in that quiet, careless way that makes a person feel invisible. In 2026, when everything they built began to fall apart, that same woman became the only reason their family didn't lose everything. Her name was Elena. For 8 years, she worked in the large marble house at the end of Silver Oak Street. Every morning before sunrise, she unlocked the back door, tied her hair neatly, and moved through the silent halls like she was part of the walls themselves. She cleaned their floors, ironed their clothes, prepared simple meals when the cook was off, and made sure the children's school bags were packed properly. She knew who liked extra sugar in their tea and who couldn't sleep without the hallway light on. But to the family, she was background noise, just a maid. Mrs. Carter would say gently when guests asked about her, "She helps around the house." Mr. Carter was a respected businessman, the kind of man who believed success could solve anything. In 2026, his company was expanding fast. New deals, new investors, new risks. The house grew bigger, the cars grew shinier, and the distance between them and Elena grew wider. Still, Elena watched. She noticed a tension in Mr. Carter's voice during late-night phone calls. She noticed the unopened letters stacking up on his office desk. She noticed how Mrs. Carter's smile started fading, replaced by quiet worry when she thought no one was looking. And she noticed something else. Numbers. Elena had once studied accounting before life forced her to quit and work to support her younger brother. She never told the family. They never asked. But sometimes, when she dusted the home office, her eyes would fall on spreadsheets left open on the computer screen. Certain figures didn't look right. Certain payments didn't make sense. She told herself it wasn't her place. Then the day came when the news broke. A deal collapsed. Investors pulled out. The company's accounts were suddenly frozen pending investigation. Headlines spread online. Phones rang nonstop. Reporters waited outside the gates. Inside the mansion, panic replaced pride. Mr. Carter locked himself in his office. Mrs. Carter cried quietly in the kitchen. The children whispered, confused and afraid. And for the first time, no one called her just a maid. They called her name. "Elena," Mrs. Carter said, her voice shaking. "Do you know where your sir keeps the financial files?" It was a simple question, but Elena's heart pounded, because she didn't just know where the files were. She knew what was wrong with them. For months, she had seen small inconsistencies, transactions that didn't match contracts, approvals that didn't carry the right signatures. Someone inside the company was moving money, carefully, quietly, and now the blame was falling on the man who had trusted too easily. Elena stood in the doorway of the office, staring at the shelves filled with files that could either destroy this family or save them. They had spent years overlooking her. Now their future rested in her hands, and what she was about to reveal would change everything. Elena did not step inside the office right away. She stood there for a moment, listening to the silence in the house. It felt different now. Heavy. The same walls that once echoed with laughter and pride now carried fear. She slowly walked toward the desk, her fingers brushing over the polished wood that she had cleaned hundreds of times before. She remembered the first time she realized something was wrong. It was late one evening, months ago. Mr. Carter had left in a hurry for an emergency meeting and forgotten to close a financial report on his screen. Elena wasn't trying to pry. She was simply dusting around the keyboard when the numbers caught her attention. Large transfers labeled as consulting fees. Repeated amounts. Different dates. The same destination account. At first, she assumed it was normal corporate activity. Big companies move money all the time, but the pattern kept appearing. Week after week, the amounts grew larger. The descriptions became more vague, and sometimes documents that were there one day were gone the next. Elena had worked quietly in that house for years, but before that, she had been a top student in her college accounting program. She understood balance sheets, audits, cash flow statements. She knew what clean books looked like, and these books were not clean. Now, in 2026, as the company faced a public financial crisis, those same transactions were at the center of the investigation. News channels were talking about possible mismanagement and internal fraud. Online articles use big words like corruption, liability, frozen assets. The Carter name, once respected in the business community, was now trending for the wrong reasons. But Elena knew something the headlines did not. Mr. Carter was careless at times, too trusting, too eager to expand. But he wasn't dishonest. The approvals on those suspicious payments had looked slightly different. The digital signatures had tiny variations, almost unnoticeable unless you knew what to look for. She opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder labeled Q3 Expansion. Her hands trembled slightly. Inside were printed contracts, vendor agreements, and internal approvals. She flipped through the pages slowly. There was again a consulting firm she had never heard Mr. Carter mention. Payments signed off under pressure during a rapid growth phase. Emails printed and attached that felt rushed and incomplete. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Mrs. Carter stood at the door, eyes red from crying. "Elena," she said softly, "they're saying the company could collapse. If the accounts stay frozen, we won't even be able to pay salaries next month." Salaries. Hundreds of employees. Families who depended on those paychecks. This wasn't just about a rich household losing comfort. This was about people's livelihoods. Elena closed the folder carefully. "There may be mistakes in the records," she said gently, "but not all mistakes are what they seem." Mrs. Carter looked at her, confused but hopeful. For years, Elena had kept her education a secret because she needed the job more than she needed recognition. The Carters never asked about her past. They assumed her future was limited to cleaning their floors. Now the situation was different. Somewhere inside the company, someone had created a system of hidden transfers. Someone had used growth and expansion as a cover. And now, with the financial investigation underway, that person was silent. Elena knew one thing for sure. If the truth stayed buried, Mr. Carter would take the fall, and the real architect of this corporate crisis would walk away untouched. She looked back at the stack of files, her mind racing. The family thought she was their last hope. What they didn't know was that digging deeper might expose secrets far bigger than missing money, and not everyone would want those secrets found. That night, Elena did something she had never done before. She asked Mr. Carter for permission to speak about the company's financial records. He looked exhausted, sitting behind his desk with his tie loosened and his phone buzzing every few minutes. The confident businessman the world knew was gone. In his place was a man who felt betrayed and cornered. "You've seen the news," he said quietly. "They think I approved fraudulent payments. They think I moved company funds for personal gain." Elena hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Sir, those approvals may not be what they look like." He stared at her, confused at first. Then something shifted in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't seeing her as just a maid. He was seeing someone who understood what he was going through. "I studied accounting," she admitted softly, "before I started working here." The silence that followed was heavy, but not dismissive. It was thoughtful. In another part of the house, Mrs. Carter was on the phone with their lawyer, discussing compliance audits and potential legal defense strategies. Words like forensic accounting and internal review kept repeating. The company board had scheduled an emergency meeting. Investors were demanding transparency. Employees were whispering about layoffs. Outside the gates, reporters were still waiting. Inside the company headquarters across town, tension was rising as well. Daniel Brooks, the chief financial officer, sat in his glass office reviewing the same financial statements Elena had noticed months ago. Unlike Mr. Carter, Daniel looked calm, too calm. He had been with the company for 5 years. He managed the budgets, approved vendor contracts, and handled investor communications. He was the one everyone trusted with the numbers. When the investigation began, he was the first to suggest that perhaps Mr. Carter had authorized risky payments without fully informing the finance team. It sounded reasonable. After all, rapid business expansion in 2026 had created pressure. Growth targets were aggressive. New markets required fast decisions. Mistakes could happen. But Elena remembered something small. One afternoon, months ago, Daniel had come to the house for a private meeting. She had served coffee in the office. While placing the tray down, She had overheard him pushing hard for a particular consulting partnership. He insisted it would optimize tax strategy and increase offshore efficiency. Those were his exact words. Now, those same consulting payments were under scrutiny. Elena began organizing the documents into piles on the desk: vendor agreements, email confirmations, payment authorizations. As she compared signatures, she noticed timing patterns. Many approvals had been submitted late at night, often after Mr. Carter had returned from international travel. Some digital timestamps overlapped in ways that didn't make sense. If someone had manipulated internal controls, they would need high-level system access, which meant this wasn't a simple accounting error. Meanwhile, the children felt the change too. Their son, Liam, overheard classmates talking about the scandal. Their daughter, Sophie, asked her mother if they were going to lose the house. The emotional weight of the corporate crisis was spreading through every corner of their lives. Elena felt it deeply. She wasn't just protecting an employer. She was protecting people she had watched grow up. But the deeper she looked, the more complicated the picture became. There were layers within layers. Subsidiary accounts, shell vendors, international transfers that led to blurred ownership trails. It wasn't random. It was structured, carefully structured. Late that evening, Elena found an internal memo that made her heart race. It referenced a temporary holding account created during the expansion phase. The approval chain included Daniel's credentials as primary administrator. Her hands went cold. If she accused the wrong person without proof, she could destroy what little trust she had just gained. If she stayed silent, Mr. Carter could face legal consequences for actions he may not have fully understood. And somewhere in the middle of this financial investigation, someone inside the company was likely aware that the records were being reviewed more closely. Elena glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone watching from the dark. The crisis was no longer just about frozen assets or damaged reputation. It was about uncovering the truth before the wrong narrative became permanent. And the more she uncovered, the clearer it became that whoever designed the system never expected a maid to look closely at the numbers. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room before a verdict. Lawyers came and went. Board members called at all hours. The company's financial crisis was now the main headline across business news channels, and the word investigation followed Mr. Carter's name everywhere. Inside the study, Elena worked quietly beside stacks of documents that seemed to grow taller by the hour. She barely slept. Every invoice, every approval code, every transfer receipt passed through her hands. She wasn't officially part of the company. She had no title, no authority. But she had something no one else seemed to have anymore: clarity. The pattern was undeniable now. The consulting firm that received the largest payments had no physical office listed. Its contact email was routed through encrypted domains. The temporary holding account mentioned in the internal memo had been activated during the company's fastest expansion period, when oversight was weakest and trust was highest. And every digital trail led back to one place: executive-level access. Late Friday evening, Mr. Carter called for a private meeting at the house. Present were his lawyer, his compliance advisor, and, surprisingly, Daniel Brooks. Elena wasn't meant to be in the room, but Mr. Carter asked her to bring in the files she had been reviewing. The moment she stepped inside, Daniel's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite read: surprise, annoyance, calculation. The lawyer began outlining the risk. If the internal audit confirmed intentional misrepresentation of financial records, the consequences could be severe: regulatory penalties, frozen corporate accounts, even personal liability. Investors were already preparing exit strategies. Daniel spoke calmly, confidently. He suggested that the discrepancies were likely the result of administrative overlap during rapid growth. He emphasized how complex corporate finance can become during expansion. He reminded everyone that Mr. Carter had personally pushed for aggressive scaling in 2026. It sounded logical, but Elena noticed something else. Every time a consulting firm's name was mentioned, Daniel avoided direct eye contact. When the holding account came up, he shifted in his chair. Small movements, subtle. Mr. Carter looked between them, torn between years of professional trust and the evidence now sitting on his own desk. "Elena," he said finally, his voice steady but strained, "tell them what you found." The room fell silent. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought they might hear it. She wasn't a board member. She wasn't a forensic accountant. She was the woman who cleaned their floors. Yet in this moment, the entire direction of the investigation seemed to rest on what she would say next. She opened the folder and laid out the documents carefully. She explained the timing inconsistencies, the overlapping digital signatures, the repeated transfer amounts disguised as consulting fees. She pointed out how the holding account had administrator privileges that bypassed certain internal approval checks. She did not accuse anyone directly, but she didn't need to. Daniel leaned forward, his tone still composed but firmer now. He questioned her qualifications. He suggested she might be misinterpreting complex corporate data. He reminded the room that she was not officially employed by the company. Elena felt the weight of his words. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if they dismissed her? What if she had misunderstood something critical? Then Mr. Carter asked a simple question that changed the air in the room. "Daniel," he said slowly, "why was a holding account created without full board documentation?" For the first time, Daniel hesitated, just slightly. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain began tapping against the windows. The tension inside the room tightened like a wire pulled too far. Phones buzzed again, news updates, investor messages, regulatory notices. The company's future, the family's reputation, the livelihoods of hundreds of employees, all balanced on the edge of the truth. Elena realized something in that moment. Whoever had designed the financial manipulation believed they were untouchable. They relied on status, authority, and silence. They never imagined the quiet person in the background would piece together the audit trail. Now, with the investigation reaching its most critical stage, the next move would decide everything. And someone in that room knew exactly how close the truth was to being exposed. Daniel's hesitation lasted only a second, but in that second, everything shifted. He straightened in his chair and gave a small, almost amused smile. "The holding account was created under emergency authorization," he said smoothly. "Approved digitally. You signed off on it, Richard." The room froze. Mr. Carter blinked. "I don't remember approving any separate holding structure." Daniel turned his laptop toward the table. On the screen was a scanned authorization form. Mr. Carter's digital signature was clearly stamped at the bottom. The date matched the exact week the company had pushed into its biggest international expansion of 2026. The lawyer leaned closer. "This looks legitimate." Elena felt her stomach drop. She had seen that document before, but something about it had felt wrong. The formatting had been slightly off compared to other board approvals. The metadata on the internal system had shown it was uploaded at 2:17 a.m., at a time when Mr. Carter had been on a long-haul flight with no confirmed Wi-Fi access. Daniel's voice stayed calm. During rapid business growth, executives often approve financial structures remotely. It's part of scaling operations. It sounded reasonable again, but then he added something that made the air even heavier. "And the system logs show that someone accessed archived transaction files from Mr. Carter's home network 3 nights ago." Everyone slowly turned toward Elena. She felt the shift instantly. The quiet support she had begun to earn now balanced on a fragile edge. She had indeed accessed files on the home office computer, reviewing records, comparing timestamps, checking internal approvals. But she had done it openly, with Mr. Carter's knowledge. Daniel continued, his tone careful but pointed. "If someone without formal authorization is handling sensitive financial data during an active investigation, that could compromise the integrity of our internal audit." The implication hung there. Sabotage, data manipulation, interference. Mrs. Carter's face went pale. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Daniel interrupted gently, "that in times of corporate crisis, we have to be cautious about who is influencing the narrative." Elena felt heat rise in her chest. She had expected resistance. She had not expected to become the target. Mr. Carter looked torn. He trusted Daniel with the company's financial systems. He had trusted Elena with his home. Now those two worlds were colliding. Before anyone could respond, Mr. Carter's phone rang again. This time it wasn't a reporter or investor. It was the lead external auditor. He put the call on speaker. "We discovered an anomaly," the auditor said. The holding account wasn't just receiving consulting payments. Funds were being transferred out to a secondary international account under a different corporate identity. That identity traces back to a minority shareholder entity created 2 years ago. Silence. Daniel's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Mr. Carter swallowed. Whose entity? There was a pause on the line. It lists Daniel Brooks as the managing beneficiary. The words didn't explode. They landed quietly, but with devastating weight. Daniel's composure didn't fully break, but a crack appeared. "That's impossible," he said quickly. "There must be a clerical error." But the tension in the room was no longer just suspicion. It was something sharper. Elena's mind raced. If Daniel had positioned himself as both architect and safety net, creating digital approvals under Mr. Carter's credentials while routing funds through layered entities, then this wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was a calculated corporate fraud designed to surface only when the company was vulnerable, and he had nearly succeeded. But then another thought hit her. If the external auditor had uncovered this link tonight, it meant someone else might already know the full picture. Someone with access beyond internal systems. Someone who might not want this information becoming public. As thunder cracked outside, the lights flickered for a brief second. Daniel slowly closed his laptop. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, his calm returning in a colder form. "If this turns into a public accusation without complete evidence, the company won't survive the fallout. Investors will run. Regulators will freeze everything permanently." It wasn't just a warning. It was leverage. Expose him now and risk total collapse. Wait, and risk losing control of the truth. Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. The family that once saw her as invisible was now standing on the edge of financial ruin, reputational damage, and a legal battle that could change their lives forever. And somewhere between digital signatures, frozen assets, and hidden corporate identities, the final move was approaching. But it was becoming clear that Daniel wasn't the only one who had been planning ahead. The silence after the auditor's words felt endless. Daniel stood up slowly, as if preparing to walk out. But Mr. Carter's voice stopped him. "Sit down." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. For the first time since the corporate crisis began, Mr. Carter sounded like himself again. Not panicked, not defensive. Clear. "Elena," he said quietly, "show them the rest." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the final folder she had kept separate from the others. She hadn't been sure she would need it. She hadn't been sure anyone would believe her long enough to see it. Inside were system activity logs she had carefully photographed days earlier when something fell off. Not altered, just preserved. Timestamps, administrator overrides, remote access entries. She laid them out one by one. "The approval form was uploaded at 2:17 a.m., she said softly. But the system metadata shows it was created locally inside the finance department server before being pushed to executive authorization. The digital signature was copied from a previous expansion document. The lawyer leaned in closer. "Copied?" "Yes," Elena replied. "The formatting code is identical. Even the spacing error under the signature line matches an older file." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And the home network access 3 nights ago?" Mr. Carter asked. Elena took a breath. "That was me reviewing records. But these earlier log entries," she pointed to another sheet, "show repeated late-night access from the CFO's secure credentials during periods when a holding account moved funds." The external auditor spoke again through the phone. "We can confirm those secondary transfers were routed through a layered shareholder entity. The beneficiary documentation links back to Mr. Brooks' registered investment group." The room shifted completely. Daniel finally dropped the calm mask. "You don't understand how corporate growth works," he snapped. "The company needed liquidity, flexibility. I created structures to protect expansion strategy. By moving money without board approval, the lawyer asked, I was protecting the company from its own poor decisions." Daniel shot back, glancing at Mr. Carter. "You wanted rapid international scaling. I made it possible. But protecting and profiting were not the same thing. The evidence was now too aligned to ignore. The digital trail, the holding account, the hidden shareholder entity. It formed a clear picture of corporate fraud built slowly, carefully, under the pressure of 2026 expansion targets. Mr. Carter leaned back in his chair, eyes closed for a brief second. When he opened them, the decision was already made. "This ends tonight," he said. The lawyer contacted authorities. The auditor secured the financial systems. Daniel's access was immediately revoked. The investigation would continue, but the narrative had shifted. The company wasn't collapsing because of its CEO. It had been undermined from within. As security escorted Daniel out, he paused at the doorway and looked at Elena. "You think you saved them," he said quietly, "but you just exposed how fragile all of this really is." Maybe he was right. The company still faced public scrutiny. The stock value had dropped. Investors would need reassurance. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but the truth was no longer buried. In the days that followed, the headlines changed. Internal fraud uncovered. CFO linked to unauthorized transfers. Mr. Carter publicly acknowledged system weaknesses and announced a full transparency initiative. Employees kept their jobs. Salaries were protected. The frozen accounts were gradually released as regulators recognized the manipulation. And Elena? The family no longer called her just a maid. They offered her a formal position in the company's financial compliance department. A title, an office, recognition. But here's the final twist no one expected. When Elena reviewed the complete forensic report weeks later, she found something small but unsettling. The initial creation of the shareholder entity, 2 years ago, had required dual executive awareness under company policy, not approval, awareness. One notification email had been sent to Daniel. The other had been automatically copied to Mr. Carter's executive inbox. It had been marked as read. Elena closed the file slowly. Maybe Mr. Carter hadn't understood the structure back then. Maybe he had trusted too easily. Or maybe ambition had made him look away from something that seemed harmless at the time. She never confronted him about it. Some truths save a family. Others test how honest that family is willing to be. And as the company rebuilt its reputation in 2026, Elena understood something deeply human. Hope can come from unexpected places, but trust once shaken is never quite the same again. After the storm passed, the house felt different. It wasn't the polished floors or the high ceilings that made the difference. It was the weight lifted off the shoulders of everyone inside. Mr. Carter walked through the halls with a quiet dignity, no longer haunted by the fear that the company he built might crumble overnight. Mrs. Carter's smile returned, gentle but genuine, and the children's laughter filled the rooms once more, tentative at first, then freer with each passing day. Elena returned to her old routine, though things had changed. She still tidied, still prepared meals, still kept watch over the small details that no one else noticed. But now she moved to the house with a sense of purpose that went beyond cleaning or organizing. She had been given a formal role in financial compliance, but she didn't take it for status. She took it to ensure that no one in the family, or in the company, would face a crisis like this again unnoticed. The employees who had been on edge during the financial panic slowly returned to work with renewed confidence. Salaries were restored, contracts honored, and investors who had initially panicked began returning, reassured by the transparency measures Elena had helped put in place. The company slowly regained its reputation, but the lessons of 2026 lingered in every decision going forward. Risk management, internal audits, and accountability became priorities, not just words on policy sheet, but guiding principles anchored by the quiet woman who had once been invisible. Mr. Carter held a small gathering one evening, just a family and a few senior staff, to acknowledge Elena's contribution. He looked her in the eye and said something that had never been said in all the years she had worked for them. "You weren't just our last hope. You were our eyes when we couldn't see, our voice when we couldn't hear, and our strength when we were too weak to act. Thank you." Elena nodded, her expression calm but thoughtful. She didn't need applause. She had already seen the impact of her work. But hearing it out loud was not lost on her. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a maid, not as a background figure, but as someone whose skills, insight, and heart mattered. Life slowly returned to a rhythm. Yet the events of that crisis left subtle marks on everyone. Mr. Carter took a more hands-on approach with oversight, attending compliance meetings personally. Mrs. Carter began mentoring employees, quietly encouraging those who, like Elena once had, might feel overlooked or underestimated. The children, now aware that wealth and comfort could never replace vigilance and integrity, began learning lessons about responsibility that no school could teach. Elena, meanwhile, reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had arrived in the house as a worker, someone considered just a maid. She had been quiet, careful, almost invisible, but she had also been observant, patient, and determined. In the crisis, those qualities became the family's lifeline. The final lesson settled in her heart. True value isn't always seen at first glance, and true trust isn't given lightly. It is earned over time, sometimes in the quietest, most unexpected ways. In 2026, a maid became the only hope for a family on the brink, and in doing so, changed the course of lives forever. As the sun rose over the house the next morning, Elena stood by the window, sipping her tea. Outside, life continued as usual, but inside, everything had shifted. Not just a company, not just a family, but the understanding that courage, insight, and quiet strength could turn even the darkest moments into a new beginning. And for Elena, that beginning was just the start of a future she had never imagined, but had more than earned.